The biggest mistake is assuming every mind is meant to work the same way. Some people can look at history, psychology, science, art, business, and see connections where everyone else sees separate subjects. Have you ever wondered why your mind keeps jumping between ideas, but somehow they all connect? For years, people may have called that scattered, unfocused, too curious, maybe even weird. But what if your mind was never unfocused at all? What if it was doing something far more unusual, building connections across completely different worlds? That's the strange thing about polymaths. They don't simply know more. They organize knowledge differently. And once your mind starts seeing those hidden patterns, it's almost impossible to go back to seeing the world as separate pieces. Imagine two people walking into a bookstore. One heads directly toward the section they already know. The other wanders. Psychology, history, technology, art, maybe philosophy. To an outside observer, it looks random. But inside that person's mind, something else is happening. An idea from psychology suddenly explains something they once read about history. A principle from biology reminds them of a problem in business. A piece of music makes them think about mathematics. Their mind is constantly building bridges. Psychologists sometimes describe this kind of thinking through concepts such as associative thinking and cognitive flexibility. Instead of storing every idea inside a separate mental box, the mind keeps asking, where else does this fit? What does this remind me of? What am I missing? And that creates an unusual advantage, because when everyone else is searching inside one field for an answer, the polymath may find it somewhere completely unexpected. But there's a hidden cost to thinking this way. The same mind that sees possibilities everywhere can struggle when the world keeps demanding one simple answer to one surprisingly difficult question. What do you want to be? For most people, that question eventually becomes easy. Doctor, teacher, engineer, artist. One title, one direction, one identity. But for a polymath, choosing one box can feel strangely unnatural. Not because they can't commit, but because every new interest seems to open another door. Imagine someone who loves psychology, but also technology. They become fascinated by human behavior, which leads them to neuroscience. Neuroscience leads to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence raises questions about philosophy, and suddenly, what looked like distraction is actually a chain of connected curiosity. This is why polymaths are often misunderstood. From the outside, their interests can look scattered. From the inside, they're building a map, and every new subject adds another piece. That's also why learning rarely ends for them. Most people were taught to think of education as a phase of life. You study, you graduate, you begin working, and eventually, you become the person who is supposed to know. A polymath never quite reaches that point, not because they know less, but because the more they learn, the more they realize how much remains unexplored. A conversation becomes a lesson. A mistake becomes information. A stranger can introduce an idea that changes the way they understand something they believed for years. Even failure becomes useful, because their first instinct isn't simply, why did this happen to me? It's, what can this teach me? And that creates another unusual trait. They're often surprisingly comfortable saying, I don't know. While some people use knowledge to protect their ego, polymaths use ignorance to expand their understanding. They would rather ask a basic question and look uninformed for 5 minutes than pretend to understand something for 5 years. Because to them, not knowing isn't embarrassing, it's an invitation. And this is where their thinking begins to separate even further from the crowd. Because eventually collecting knowledge isn't enough. They start questioning something much more uncomfortable, the beliefs they already have. Here is where the polymath mind becomes truly uncomfortable for other people. It doesn't just question the world, it questions itself. Most people slowly become attached to what they believe. An opinion becomes familiar, then comfortable, and eventually, it becomes part of their identity. So when someone challenges that belief, it can feel like they're challenging the person. A polymath tends to approach beliefs differently. They don't ask, how can I prove I'm right? They ask, what if I'm wrong? That single question changes everything, because when new evidence appears, They're willing to update the map, not because they're weak or indecisive, but because understanding reality matters more than defending an old version of themselves. Think about updating the software on your phone. You wouldn't reject every update simply because the old version feels familiar. Yet people do exactly that with their beliefs all the time. Polymaths are often more willing to let an outdated idea die, so a better one can take its place. And that creates another unusual ability. They can hold two opposing ideas in their mind, without immediately needing one of them to win. Discipline matters, but so does rest. Confidence matters, but so does humility. Independence can make you stronger. Connection can too. Instead of asking, which side is right, they ask, under what conditions could both be true? This is where pattern recognition becomes powerful, because life rarely gives us one isolated cause. A relationship doesn't collapse because of one argument. A successful person rarely succeeds because of one lucky decision. Today's visible event is often the result of dozens of invisible patterns that began years earlier. Most people notice the event. The polymath searches for the system behind it. And once you begin thinking in systems, something strange happens. The world becomes more complicated, but at the same time, far more understandable. Because you stop asking only what happened. You start asking, what made it inevitable? And that question leads us to perhaps the most misunderstood part of the polymath mind. Why seeing so many possibilities can sometimes make finding your own place in the world surprisingly difficult. And this may be the part nobody warns them about. When your mind can imagine 10 different paths, choosing only one can feel like losing the other 9. The world tells you to specialize. Pick a career, choose one passion, stay in your lane, become easy to describe. But a polymath often struggles with that advice, not because they're afraid of commitment, but because their identity was never built around one subject. They may be fascinated by psychology today, technology tomorrow, then suddenly lose themselves in philosophy, music, history, or art. To other people, this can look inconsistent. To them, it's all part of the same journey. Every interest becomes another lens. Every skill changes how they see the others. And eventually, as far as something begins to happen, the connections become more valuable than the individual pieces. An idea from psychology solves a business problem. Something learned through music changes how they understand patterns. History helps them recognize behavior, repeating in the present. Art teaches them to notice what logic alone might miss. This is the real advantage of the polymath mind. Not knowing everything, but being able to bring together things that were never supposed to meet. And perhaps that's why so many people with this kind of mind spend years feeling out of place. They've been measuring themselves against a world designed to reward specialization. One profession, one expertise, one label. But maybe the goal was never to fit neatly inside one box. Maybe it was to build bridges between them. That doesn't make every curious person a polymath, and it doesn't make a polymath more intelligent or more valuable than anyone else. It simply describes a different relationship with knowledge. A mind that keeps exploring, keeps questioning, keeps updating, keeps connecting. So if you've spent years wondering why you can't just choose one interest, why simple explanations rarely satisfy you, or why seemingly unrelated ideas constantly collide inside your head, perhaps it's time to stop treating that curiosity like a flaw. Maybe you were never too scattered. Maybe you were never too curious. Maybe you were never weird. Maybe your mind was simply built to connect what everyone else was taught to keep separate.